Great. So our next speaker will be Katye Altieri. We'll be chatting to us about transformation in science with respect to gender and race. Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you have to say, Katye. Please take it away.
Thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Today, I'm very pleased to present to you our Ocean Women program. This is something that I lead along with co-PIs Isabel, Sarah Fawcett, and Juliet Hermes. I think you guys heard from Isabel earlier today. And the name of the program, when we wrote the proposal, was Seeing a Change in the Demographics of Oceanographic Research in South Africa. But I hope for those of you from a more international audience, you'll see that there's actually a lot about this program that's applicable in the global context. And indeed, that's one of our goals, is to have a program that where we can learn lessons that go beyond the South African context. So to give you a background for those of you that aren't familiar with the program, the Advancing Women program came from the University of Cape Town's Vice Chancellor. The Vice Chancellor was new in 2018, and she, as one of her main initiatives, announced a proposal call for women and transgender researchers at UCT to take advantage of. And the focus had to be on training postgraduates and postdoctoral fellows, and there was a specific emphasis on building capacity amongst Black South African women. And this was a very large program. Each grant was given 5 million Rand over 5 years. And so we took advantage and leveraged this opportunity as the women in the Department of Oceanography. And so to tell you a bit more about our department here at UCT, there's a large number of postgraduate students supervised by the academic staff here, but also by our HRAs, so by our partner organizations. And when we ran these numbers for the proposal, the total number of Black South African women was about 12 out of 73 students. So given the demographics of South Africa, this obviously is an unacceptable number. Our academic staff here in the department are 100% white and greater than 50% foreign, myself included. I'm sure some of you can hear my accent. I'm not originally South African, I'm from the US. And although our postgraduate student demographics are more than 50% female, as are our academic staff, so from the perspective of gender balance, we're doing quite well. But from the perspective of other types of diversity, we're essentially failing miserably. And the fact that our academic staff is greater than 50% female is actually what led us to come together. You know, at some point in your career, you get to a place where you actually feel like you can foment change around you, and you don't necessarily have to accept the system as is. And you might have even been able to leverage that system given your own advantages and your own privileges. But I think one of the key things that we need to do as a community, that we all need to take responsibility for, is assessing the system as it exists, changing it as needs be, and full on dismantling it in some cases. And so the four of us came together to write this proposal because we wanted to see a change. We wanted to change the way things look in oceanographic research in South Africa. For example, there's a lot of opportunities for South African oceanographers. They're frequently asked to represent South Africa in the international sphere, to represent all of sub-Saharan Africa, to represent the whole Southern Hemisphere, right? This is not an unusual thing that happens. And these international organizations, they want representation, but frequently they end up with someone like me. And what they really don't, the last thing they need is another white American on the panel, right? It'd be much better if they had a different type of representation from South Africa. And this is one of the big motivators for us in writing this proposal and coming together to try to see how we could change this. And so the aim of what became known as the Ocean Women program is to develop a prestigious research and leadership training program for Black women, with a focus on recruiting, retaining, and enabling success for the next generation of Black women oceanographers. And we emphasize here on the prestigious and the leadership aspects of this. This is not some sort of a remedial, oh, you know, here's a bursary sort of situation. This is where we are identifying the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the next generation who are going to be those outstanding international leaders in oceanography, and in particular in Southern Ocean science here in South Africa. But we need to, in order to change the current environment, we need to sort of take stock of the current environment. And so in order to achieve this aim, we outlined 3 objectives for the program. The first being to identify the barriers to recruitment, retention, and success. So I can tell you a lot about the barriers that I faced as a young woman in science, but I can't tell you about the unique difficulties of being a Black woman in science, or of being a transgender woman in science, or of any other intersecting identities that I don't hold. So we had to first identify these barriers and then come up with strategies to overcome them. The second was to create an environment that enables Black women to succeed in their studies and become leaders. So you can't bring people in and recruit people and then expect them to succeed if the entire environment around them isn't designed for their success. In some cases, it can be explicitly designed for them not to succeed. And so changing that environment was a key second objective for us. And the third was to develop and evaluate a training program that could be applied more generally. So there are some aspects of the Ocean Women program and what we're trying to do here that are uniquely South African, but some are not. Some are very much issues that marine science programs globally will have. And so we want to be able to identify those lessons that are local and those that are more global, and really connect with other programs abroad who are trying to stimulate similar types of change so that we can be a leader in this sphere. So in terms of identifying and overcoming the barriers, we identified three main barriers to success. The first being financial, the second being professional, and the third being personal. So the financial barriers to success are things such as having a reasonable bursary, so enough money that you can live off of and focus on your studies. We thought it was very important to provide relocation expenses for students moving to Cape Town. And I know this is a problem in universities around the world, that you're expected to start a new fellowship somewhere and that you'll get your funding at some point after you show up, which makes no sense. We also wanted to provide an extra year stipend to allow for the women to focus on the additional training and leadership opportunities without feeling that their studies were under pressure. And of course, providing the funding for laptop or for travel opportunities, whether it be conferences or summer schools. Isabel spoke earlier about the importance of having a good relationship with your supervisor. And the reality is that a lot of your financial access, whether you can go to a conference, whether you can get a new computer, whether you have access to the software you need, a lot of that will be directly controlled by your postgraduate supervisor. And so we also wanted to have this fellowship be something that gave the women some independence, you know, that they've earned this access to this kind of resources without being dependent on their supervisor. The second set of barriers related to the professional side of things. Networking is critical. Polisa just gave a great talk on the importance of networking on social media. I did not know that you could schedule tweets. This is something I will be investigating. But networking is important, and a lot of it is built on relationships. And so if you come from a different culture from your supervisor, or if you are not of the dominant culture that's present at a conference or a workshop, it can be very difficult to engage in that networking. And so we wanted to really identify ways to help build network for our fellows. The second is training. So opportunities to go to summer schools, for online trainings, whatever it may be. And unfortunately, COVID has interfered with our ability to use semester, but this is the South Africa's class of floats. And the idea would be that our fellows would be able to participate in semester each year to go through various stages of being a student to being a lecturer, all the way up to undergoing chief scientist training with Isabel, who has a lot of experience with that. And providing opportunities for fellows to participate in international meetings of a variety of sorts to prepare them for that environment and so that they can learn. And so the one thing we have been successful with COVID is we've had monthly networking meetings with various outstanding Black women in STEM from around South Africa. And that so far has been a real highlight of the program in terms of broadening the network of our fellows. The third big barrier to success we identified was personal barriers, essentially interpersonal relationships, those feelings of imposter syndrome that we all have, myself included, the importance of building good relationships with mentors, and also the idea of bringing a cohort of students together. Frequently students start on an ad hoc basis. So you'll have one student start in February, another student starts 6 months later, and it can be very isolating. And so we felt strongly that we wanted to bring in a group of Ocean Women Fellows together as a class that they could rely on one another in a peer mentoring way. And we also wanted to make sure things were accessible, such as field gear, diving opportunities, a skipper's license. These are the sort of culture of oceanography that some of us have access to or had access to growing up, because we come from a place of privilege, and others have not. And so to sort of try to level that playing field with these typical oceanographic activities that people enjoy. So we create opportunities for our fellows to take advantage of that. And those sorts of small personal things can be overlooked in terms of their importance for really feeling a part of the scientific community. The second big objective is to change the environment. And this is where all of us, whether you're later in your career, early in your career, white, black, male, female, we all play a role in changing the environment and enabling everyone to succeed around us. And I think it's really important that those of us who have benefited from our privilege really be the leaders with trying to change the environment and to make it a more welcoming space in general. And of course, change always begins at home. So the first place we started with this was to bring in a professional consultant team who focus on diversity and transformation into the oceanography department. And they held some focus group sessions early last year with Black women who have been part of the department. So going right to the most important source of information to identify what are the key issues, what needs to be changed, how do we go about doing it? A lot of these problems are invisible to us because we're staff. We don't know about the student experience, or invisible to us because we're not part of a minority group, whatever it may be. We need the difficult information brought to the front. And the results of these focus groups really highlighted that there needs to be serious intent to transform and confront uncomfortable issues in our department. And I suspect that is something that is universally true in academic environments around the globe. The other really key part was that intake was a key time for intervention. We have no orientation currently for any students, let alone for students who maybe are coming from different backgrounds. And the third is that co-production is really critical, that we don't necessarily need to be creating this program from above. We need to allow the students and the fellows to help guide the direction that this program is going. And that's something that has been really great so far. For one example I can give you is the logo for Ocean Women, which I showed at the beginning and I'll show again. We worked with an organization to help create a logo. And the PIs of the project, we had a couple that we liked and a couple that we thought weren't a great idea. And we kicked it to the fellows. And the direction they took it was completely different than the direction we would have taken it. But the logo is amazing, and I've seen people on social media commenting on, seeing Black women from around the world commenting on how great they think that logo is. And so I think that's a great example of the importance of co-production. The third objective was to develop and evaluate a training program. So this is something I presented this program at the Ocean Sciences Conference in San Diego early this year, back when traveling to conferences was still a thing. And it was great to connect with people from, in particular, US universities who are also trying to change their demographics. And the reality is that in the South African context, although it feels like we're eons behind, the fact that we even have these conversations and that there's a situation where a vice chancellor is giving money into a program like this, it actually shows that we're light years ahead of some of these other places. Because we have actual, actionable items, funding, support. The general consensus is that this is something that needs to happen. And so we're hoping to, at the end of this year, early next year, we're going to ask for our program to be evaluated by external consultants. And we're going to start to try to gear towards having some lessons learned and connecting more with other programs internationally to see if we can come up with some guidelines for others who are trying to do this, to try to create the change we want to see here, but then allow for that change to be broadened. And so I wanted to just highlight, this is the front of our Ocean Women website, supporting a new generation of Black oceanographers. And here you can see the cohorts of women that we have are the ones who are going to really lead the change, lead the future of oceanography. And I think that's the critical component of the Ocean Women program. Is our job is to facilitate, to provide the funding, to provide the space, and then really to get out of the way and allow these amazing young women to lead the change. And I think the Black in Geoscience week on Twitter was, I think, a great example of that. You hear this refrain frequently that oh, we would have more Black scientists present, but they just don't exist. And I think that is very rapidly becoming a falsehood. We know these people exist. And one of Kalisa's excellent points about social media is that you need to put yourself out there. You need to put yourself forward. But also those of us in leadership positions or more senior in our careers, we need to take responsibility to go find these young people and to identify them and give them the space to grow and develop. And so with that, I leave you with our information on where you can find us online. And I'm happy to answer questions anyone might have about similar programs in their own department, or if anyone would like to know details about how we're trying to go about changing things here. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that. It's so good to see what's happening within science at the moment. So since this program has started, have you seen an improvement with respect to the gender and race ratio of science, or is it too early to tell right now?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell, although one plus so far is we've been advertising the program in our undergraduate and honors cohorts. And so that's been a good way to sort of try to get more young people through and into the program. But I think, I don't know if we're going to see big demographic changes because our program isn't that broadly applicable, because as I said, we're really focusing on identifying the really outstanding top of the class women. This is a leadership program, not a sort of general change program. And so I think it will be slow to come to where we have that broader change. And the reality is we had to focus on outstanding students with great leadership potential because we don't have the funding to have more than 5 to 10 fellows throughout the course of the program, which is an unfortunate reality.
And with respect to that and not having enough funding, you said you touched on collaborating with international programs. How does South Africa compare to global inequalities? What other international programs can you collaborate with respect to this gender and race inequality?
So there's a lot of work being done generally on improving diversity in the geosciences, in all aspects of the geosciences. So this is definitely a push, and the international scientific societies have really been responding, in particular to the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, with respect to recognizing that when we look around at scientific leadership in all spheres of earth sciences, that it is largely a white space. And when you look at the scientists that are present in just sort of these disparate networks, that's not necessarily true. So there's definitely some sort of a barrier between bringing scientists into the earth sciences and actually having more diverse people stepping up into leadership roles or being allowed to step up into leadership roles. And so I think we can learn a lot from one another outside the South African context in terms of changing structures, providing support, not overburdening minority candidates who already have it difficult enough, and really taking responsibility for making that kind of change. So I think as much as we have to do here in South Africa, there's a lot that we can do. And I actually think this is a space that we can lead on. Because a lot of departments, when you talk to people, they say, oh, we're trying to make a change in our department, but there's literally no funding behind it. Whereas here, even though the funding is limited, we can only fund so many students a year. The fact that our vice chancellor has put funding into this is a sign of how seriously we are taking it.
Yeah, it's so amazing. So even though the funding is little, us as individuals can make a difference. So what can what can the listeners do as an early career researcher to address the gender and race issues in science?
The most important thing we can all do, but particularly what early career researchers can do, because you guys are usually the ones who are out in the field, who are on the ship. I think it's very important to take stock of the environment around you and to be a leader. And if you hear something inappropriate said, you say something in response, and you make it clear that inappropriate language, suggestive language, demeaning language will not be accepted in your presence. And I think we all can try to change that culture. It's a very unusual space we live in, where you might, for example, be on an oceanographic research ship, which is almost essentially like a hotel with your colleagues. It's not every professional environment where you would find yourself eating meals and sharing rooms with people you work with. And so we do have these divides cross between our personal space and our workspace. And I think we all can work very hard to ensure that that's a comfortable space for everyone, and make it clear that we will demand accountability from our colleagues in that space, and insist that it's a comfortable space for everyone, and be essentially the voice for the silenced, I think.
Yeah, that's good. Holding accountability for our peers is a really good way of moving forward. I just have one more question from me. I'm not sure about anyone else, but does this transformation conversation include issues on sexual harassment, and like you mentioned, on the ship and field work or in the workplace?
I think it should. I think these are cross-cutting issues, right? And I think absolutely issues of sexual harassment and feeling in safe spaces is a part of the transformation. There's a reason that it took women for a very long time to feel comfortable going to sea, and part of that is the numbers. If you're the only woman, it's a very uncomfortable situation. If you can increase representation, you change the culture. And I think that's similarly true for transformation. If you're the only Black person in the room, the only Black person on the ship, it's going to be potentially very uncomfortable. And when we can increase representation, you can change that culture. And then to take it a step further, increasing representation in leadership positions helps even more significantly. I'm sure many of you saw the report that came out about the Mosaic cruise recently, and the ship in the Arctic, where the issues they were having with women scientists being policed on what they were allowed to wear and not allowed to wear. And the fact that there were very few women in leadership positions, I'm sure contributed to that situation. And so, yeah, I think they're absolutely cross-cutting. And again, that's a situation where we all need to police the space, where when men are together in a room and there's only men and something is said, you have a responsibility, to say that you won't stand for that kind of language, you won't stand for that kind of behavior, as difficult as it is.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so good to hear, and it's good to hear that your focus is on leadership and accountability, and it'll definitely create a sustainable program. So thank you so much. Those are all my questions. I'm not sure, we've got 5 more minutes, and then Liesl can take over. If anyone else has a question.
Yes, Alka, there's a question from, or maybe a comment from the attendees, is that sometimes you don't know where to report behavior, or when you have a grievance against someone, where you can report it and it being anonymous enough that you are not affected by you speaking out. Katye, do you know maybe if there's talk about it in the SANA program, or maybe on a South African scale? Because we know the international conversations are happening, but we're not sure, what is the situation here closer to home?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's a challenging one. So on the most recent scale cruises, we had a male chief scientist, and we also had a female lead appointed, who was someone that you could go to if you had an issue to report. Now, of course, if you're the only Black woman on a research vessel and you have an issue to report that involves someone saying something demeaning about a Black woman, obviously you have no chance of anonymity. And I think this is a massive issue. And in terms of the accountability, I would like to say that we need to hold senior scientists accountable. But the reality is, the way academic hierarchies are set up, it's very difficult to hold senior scientists accountable. And I myself am a part of that hierarchy. And as someone who's not super high in the academic hierarchy, I'm also facing this issue. Or, for example, if the issue comes from the captain themselves, who do you go to about this? And I think this is something we really need to work on in the stand-up community, and reinforcing lines of communication, and that people will be, even if you cannot protect their anonymity, that they will be respected for saying something and speaking up. And we really do need to work on that. And I think the reality is people above my head in terms of seniority needs to come to the table on this, so that we have mechanisms, whether it's other academics or heads of departments, chief scientists, co-chief scientists, but really being aware that this is an issue. And I think it's a difficult one.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Katye. Thanks. Okay, Liesl, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Alka and Katye, for that very good talk. I think we should have more conversations like these.